A very warm welcome back to day 2 of our event. Yesterday, discourse successfully mapped out nuanced ASEAN perspective, the intersection of law and technology in enforcement, and the legal realities facing resource sovereignty and the code of conduct. To give us a recap of day 1 of our event yesterday, may I please call on Ms. Dominic Altea Policarpia. Ms. Dominic, give applause for Ms. Dominic, please.
Good morning. The first day of the conference featured 4 substantive panel discussions that examined the continuing relevance of the 2016 South China Sea Arbitral Award from legal, diplomatic, governance, and socio-economic perspectives. The discussions highlighted the award's enduring significance as a cornerstone of international maritime law and as an important reference point for maintaining a rules-based regional order. The first panel, featuring the presentations of Deputy Assistant Secretary Rogelio Villanueva, Associate Professor Hazmi Rusli, and Dr. Zheng Jiwa, discussed views on the 2016 Arbitral Award. The panel surfaced the different perspectives and appreciation of the award, especially between the Philippines and China and with non-party and non-claimant states in Southeast Asia. Panelists have reflected on how the award has shaped maritime discourse over the past decade and how ASEAN member states adopted varying approaches on account of differing national interests. 2 important themes, however, have emerged. First, all parties value the importance of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. Secondly, and relatedly, all parties need to navigate the difficulties and promises of the award and its implication to addressing interim and long-term challenges. The second panel, featuring the presentations of Professor Ari Afriansha, Dr. Ashura Salle, and Director Thanesha Anbalagan, featured 3 pragmatic pathways that help enforce the award more substantively and effectively. Panelists explored how technological innovation, enhanced maritime domain awareness, stronger legal and diplomatic strategies, and cooperation among regional and external partners could reinforce compliance with international law while mitigating tensions. Legally, the award is an invitation to coalesce towards the UNCLOS without prejudicing state positions. Technologically, the award must be scaffolded with technical expertise to bring about concrete outcomes that all countries can tap into and collaborate with. Socioeconomically, the award is an invitation to think long-term that involves the next generation of Southeast Asians who will uphold international law as the bedrock of regional stability in ASEAN. The third panel, featuring the presentations of Professor Liu Nengye, Dr. Nguyen Thi Lan Wong, Mr. Neil S. Silva, and with reflections from Dr. Kitty Prasirtsuk, show the direct implications of the award with the much-anticipated Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. In the last 2 decades of its negotiations, there are anticipations and warranted fears about the kind of COC that is on the horizon. The merits of the 2016 Arbitral Award adds a layer of complexity to the conclusion of a binding COC across Southeast Asia. Panelists explored the importance of stronger legal and diplomatic strategies and cooperation among regional and external partners in reinforcing compliance with international law. The ongoing negotiations for a substantive and effective code of conduct emphasizes the importance of ensuring that future regional arrangements remain consistent with UNCLOS and complement, rather than undermine, the legal clarifications established by the award. The fourth and final panel, featuring the presentations of Dr. Emirza Adi Siailendra and Dr. Su Waimon, explored the economic security dimension of the award's implications for resource sovereignty, environmental stewardship, fisheries and ocean governance, and energy and food security. The immediate impact of the award has been felt at the level of coastal communities, and the emerging policies in response to the award impacts real lives. Tangential to the discussions, the panel raises the alerts with respect to critical maritime infrastructure, because Southeast Asia is powered by a dense infrastructure that runs through features, cross-regional, and transboundary cooperation, becomes all the more imperative for all of ASEAN and external partners like China. Taken together, the four panels demonstrated that a decade after its issuance, the Arbitral Award continues to provide an important legal and normative framework for addressing contemporary maritime challenges. While differences in national perspectives remain, the discussions revealed broad recognition of the value of sustained dialogue, pragmatic cooperation, and adherence to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea in fostering regional stability. The success of the sessions was reflected not only in the depth and quality of the exchanges, but also in the shared commitment of participants to continue building understanding across ASEAN. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Dominic, for the wisdom. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today our itinerary expands to examine the wider geopolitical equilibrium and future frameworks from professional regional cooperation. To initiate our morning deliberations, we address the strategic landscape in panel session 5, Geopolitical Considerations and Regional Stability. I have the honor of passing the floor to our moderator, Mr. Dr. Edi Prasetyono from the ASEAN Studies Center, FISIP, Universitas Indonesia. Dr. Edi Prasetyono, you may have the floor. Give a round of applause for Dr. Edi.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Edi Prasetyono from the Department of International Relations, University of Indonesia. I would like to, to introduce the speakers today. The topic is very important. I think the so-called geopolitical considerations and regional stability. I know that this is, a little bit sensitive. And we are talking about South China Sea. There are, of course, some questions, that we are going to talk about or we are going to answer. First one, for example, that whether the PCA rulings is actually create more tension or it is softened or the positions of the countries involved. And secondly, of course, whether, the PCA ruling or South China Sea conflict, has some kind of provided some legitimacy, for the development of armed forces in the regions, or maybe it's going to create, some, conflict more, rivalry. It's going to be much stronger, and of course, we are going to see, what is the roles of the external powers that, in the conflict. Yesterday we are talking a lot, about the implementations, of the PCA ruling. We are talking about the relevance, of the rulings, whether it's still relevant or not, in today's, situation. But of course, I think the other question that we need to address is, of course, whether, this case actually, will provide some kind of similar, initiatives, for other countries to bring the case, to the PCA. That will be also, very interesting. We have three speakers here. First is, of course, Dr. Charmaine Willoughby, from De La Salle University of Philippines, and then from Singapore, Chin Chan, Senior Fellow, Coordinator of Maritime Security Program, Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University, and of course my colleagues, from the Department of International Relations, Dr. Ristian, Supriyanto, from the and also from Indonesia Sinology Forum. I think we are, talking, about the geopolitical aspect of the PCA ruling, and that will be very interesting. What is the importance, of the ruling from the geopolitical perspective? So now I would like to invite Dr. Charmaine Willoughby, from De La Salle University of the Philippines, to make a presentation. Thank you.
Everyone, and welcome back after a day of full discussions yesterday. I did not know that I will be presenting today, but my good friend and organizer, Julio, asked me to do so. So please indulge me in sharing a little bit of my thoughts and my ideas on how the region continues to grapple with various mechanisms to achieve regional stability. My insights, of course, will be from the perspective of a Filipino from the Philippines in Southeast Asia. So to set the stage, I'd like to begin by highlighting several recent events, at least in the last 2 months, recent events that have become really a byproduct of these geopolitical forces that we've been talking about since yesterday. In May 2026, the annual Balikatan exercises between the United States and the Philippines were held. This is a massive exercise including 17,000 personnel, including this time around Canada, Australia, New Zealand, France, and for the very first time since the Second World War, Japan was also included. The fact that Japan was included is a testament to closer relations between the Philippines and Japan, as seen in President Marcos's state visit to Japan in May, where they upgraded ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership. The next month, in June, China installed a floating platform in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. This platform could carry 6 persons. It bore an antenna with fenders all around it. Questions emerged regarding, what this platform was for. Was it merely for scientific research? Was it an environmental facility? Was it a meteorological station? Whatever it was, concerns arose over the dual-use capability. Sure, on one hand, it could enhance maritime domain awareness, but at the same time, it could also expand surveillance. The Philippines protested this move, and after a couple of weeks, thankfully, the platform has been removed. Another incident in June bears emphasis, and this is the fact that China sanctioned the Philippine Secretary for National Defense, Teodoro, and for the first time, he's the highest government official to have been sanctioned by China. Despite all of these incidents, we can actually comfort ourselves by thinking that at least there's been no ramming incidents. At least there's been no tailing of Philippine Coast Guard vessels. There have been no dangerous maneuvers, at least. No severed thumbs that we've seen last year. So there is an argument to be made, actually, that, things seem to be rather good. Or there's also an argument to be made that maybe this is just a lull. Maybe this is the calm before the storm. And if that is the case, then we cannot actually rest and think that, okay, everything is going to be smooth sailing from here on. It must be emphasized that there continue to be rising geopolitical challenges. Great power competition continues despite all of the things that I've just mentioned. So in the face of all of these challenges, not to mention questions about the post-1945 rules-based international order, of which we discussed at length yesterday, a small and middle power like the Philippines needs to navigate these troubled waters cautiously and strategically. And to do so, I would argue in my remarks today that the Philippines must be cognizant of three signposts. Number one, what are the risks that the Philippines and Southeast Asia are facing? Number two, who are the players involved? And number three, what kinds of synergies must we all take into consideration? So let me begin by talking about risks. And here I'd like to gather insights or get insights from the State of Southeast Asia Survey 2026 published by the Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. And according to that survey, the top challenges for Southeast Asia include climate change and extreme weather conditions, economic tensions between major powers, and domestic politics as a cause or a source of instability. For the Philippines, meanwhile, the top challenges include climate, military tensions from flashpoints like the South China Sea, and economic tensions. So it's very interesting here to see that climate actually is on top of the identified challenges for the region and for the Philippines. Regarding geopolitical concerns, meanwhile, for Southeast Asia, Southeast Asia sees the Trump administration, not necessarily the United States in general, but the Trump administration as a top geopolitical concern, followed by scam operations that are very much prevalent in Southeast Asia and tensions in the South China Sea. For the Philippines, the top geopolitical concerns include aggressive behavior in the South China Sea, scam operations, and drug smuggling. Now, please keep in mind that these identified concerns, both for Southeast Asia and the Philippines, have been identified or singled out prior to the crisis in Hormuz. Keeping in mind that Hormuz actually changes the ballgame altogether because it made it apparent how vulnerable we all are to external shocks, that there is a domino effect across economies that have an impact on business operations, employment, and household livelihoods. The damage also includes spills over to critical infrastructure, vital systems, and trust and credibility in general. In the face of all of these risks, let me now move on to my second point regarding the major players in this ecosystem. There are, of course, on one hand, the great powers. China remains the most influential economic and strategic partner for many of us in the region. There is also the United States, and interestingly, Japan is now playing a more active role, even more so than before. The trusted partners for Southeast Asia are Japan, the European Union, the United States, China, and India. For the Philippines, it's always a mix of these three countries, the Philippines, Japan, and Australia. ASEAN, of course, is also a major player in this context, but there are general perceptions that ASEAN remains slow and ineffective. There's also a perceived institutional inertia, as well as limited decision-making capacity, which begs the question of whether or not we need to do an audit of ASEAN, a scorecard maybe, on regarding what member states have promised and committed to do so, and whether or not we have actually done what we have promised to do. But we need to be mindful of this because politics are involved. Naming and shaming is not necessarily the ASEAN way, so we need to be very careful about this. Interestingly, this year the Philippines holds the ASEAN chairmanship, but the region does not really have a lot of confidence in the Philippines' leadership, as attested by, again, survey results from the Yusof Ishak Institute. When asked how ASEAN views the Philippines, or what Southeast Asian states view as the leader of the region, many respondents said that it's actually Singapore. 31.3% of respondents said that they trust Singapore the most, followed by Indonesia with 22.2%, and then Malaysia, Thailand, and then the Philippines is right there somewhere in the middle with only 4.7%. This is quite alarming considering that the Philippines is front and center this year in ASEAN, especially more so because we promised that we would conclude the Code of Conduct. So let me now talk a little bit more about the Code of Conduct and the prospects for whether or not this will be concluded under the Philippines chairmanship. Whether or not we will be able to do this, personally, as an academic, I have my doubts, but whether or not, if we could do it, we need to remember that there are key issues that remain unresolved, including the geographic scope of the code, the legal status, and the enforcement mechanisms. Even if we were able to push this to the finish line, it is still unlikely that the code will be able to stop gray zone activities or coercive behavior. What we need to remember is that the Code of Conduct comes with it a certain trade-off. On one hand, do we want a politically feasible code based on general principles, in which case that makes it a rather thin code? Or on the other hand, do we really want to push for a more robust framework with clear rules and enforcement mechanisms? It bears repeating that the Code of Conduct is a political project. But just because it is a political project, we must still remember that no one actually stands to gain from abandoning the process because of the time and effort that have already been invested in it. So the best effort, really, for the region to move forward with the COC hanging over our heads would be to reiterate the sovereign positions of all claimants without prejudice, and to institutionalize confidence-building mechanisms, regular consultations, and reporting mechanisms, all under the framework of ASEAN. It could be the best of both worlds that we can aim for at this point. Okay. So, so far my discussion has centered on the risks, the players, the synergies I have also managed to integrate into this discussion. I will end my short presentation here because time is of the essence, and I look forward to our conversation later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chairman. Let me now invite Ms. Chan. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for the introduction. Very good morning, one and all. A quick word of thanks to the organizers, of course, especially Julio and his team for the very kind invitation and generous hospitality. And also to Ari and your team, right, for the very warm welcome and the steadfast determination, right, to continue hosting this event here in Jakarta. Some of you will know Elena Noor. So Elena and I, we put up a commentary on the South China Sea a few months back at the RSIS commentary series, and we spoke about, the South China Sea. And that's where we stated that far too often, South China Sea is viewed through a geopolitical lens as a flashpoint. And since there's probably only 3 people who read that commentary, including the editor of the RSIS commentary, I plan to iterate some of our arguments here today to suit the theme on geopolitical consideration. But actually, those of you who were here yesterday, you would have heard through the proceedings where we got a sense of how the geopolitical dynamics have been weighing on developments in the South China Sea. So viewed from that broader context, right? Viewed from that broader context, the international order, as we discussed yesterday, and the one that we know it to be, right? is arguably going to undergo very profound transformation if and when it recovers from the current fragmented states where institutional structures are crumbling, where laws, rules, and principles are fraying, where the use of force is increasingly being normalized, and where trade is being weaponized, and the deployment of gray zone tactics, as you know, already highlighted by many speakers yesterday and this morning by Charmaine. I think you will agree with me that given the developments around the world, not least the direction that the US is going, putting partnership in question and undermining multilateral mechanisms, the ability in this region to sustain viable multilateral platforms and mechanisms, especially those led by ASEAN, to me, is a premium and should not be taken for granted. Right? Watching the predicament in Europe and in the Middle East, the key takeaway, at least for me in Asia, is that we in Asia still have some space. Right? We have a space and a real choice about the future of regional order, but it will require concerted effort, as we raised and discussed yesterday, and to ensure that we do not squander the space that we have right now. So this current geopolitical uncertainty, in my mind, gave a lot of impetus, right, for us to think about the type of order we hope to have and how these developments have implication to the South China Sea a decade after the 2016 Arbitral Award. So my remarks today will touch broadly on three dimensions, right? The development post-award. I will also highlight, what are some of the key issues Southeast Asia are watching, and a few words about ASEAN. So the South China Sea tension, right, as we know it to be, is never only about the complex territorial and maritime disputes between the claimants, right? Those remain unresolved, and that was not the intent when the Philippines brought the case to the arbitral proceedings anyway, as mentioned yesterday. And upon the delivery of the award, right, there was a lot of effort in the region, especially analysts, this part of the world and outside of the region, assessing the various responses, right? First and foremost, of course, those of China, then ASEAN, and then, of course, the international community. So the so-called Battle of Not Verbal a while back saw China receiving more serious pushback from Southeast Asia as well as extra-regional powers. And all the objecting states refer to UNCLOS and have challenged the legality of China's claim based on historical right and the 9-dash line. And the most important development then, in my mind, was that we saw Southeast Asian states coming out more vocally, placing an emphasis on the importance of UNCLOS and the Arbitral Award. And this change in attitude, right, no doubt abetted by China's own attitude towards international law, and is perceived to be on the path of challenging the current rules-based legal order in regional waters. Some continue to argue that the major power competition in the South China Sea drove out tensions, and that the increased frequency in naval and enforcement activities will increase the risk of incident and accident at sea. And arguments have been made that these conditions may erode the much-needed atmosphere for trust and confidence and amity for resolving regional maritime disputes. But there are, of course, competing perceptions on this line of assessments, right? So incidents at sea in the last decade demonstrates, to me at least, a very worrisome trend of gray zone tactics being employed in this part of the world. Apart from the frequency and the severity of some of these incidents, it is also a question of whether some of these activities constitute a change in the status quo. So as state takes a hardening position on the interpretation and application of international law, including UNCLOS, that is not universal and consistent, the tension that we see today, I'm afraid, can only become worse. So a bit about Asian claimants, right, and the distinct way in which each of them manage and advance their claims and interests in the that this is largely reflective of the evolving relations each Southeast Asian capital city have with Beijing. right? For most claimants, it is a deliberate decision of compartmentalizing South China Sea issue with the broader context of the bilateral relationship with China. And to me, one of the biggest change in the region since the Arbitral Award that we do need to talk about is the increase in Chinese naval and maritime power. So the increase in Chinese assertive maneuver presented challenges for claimants, which saw a need to respond to such threat at sea while needing to sustain relations and vital trade relations with one of the world's largest markets. So while these states recognize the significance of maintaining economic relations with China, they find themselves in a position of relative disadvantage in the South China Sea, given China's substantive military prowess, right? So what else is Southeast Asia watching? As great power competition between US and China continues to develop across important sectors, right? And the competing vision of a maritime order becomes more divisive, every choice that the US makes as it reviews its role as a global security provider matters to us. And even if US chooses a narrow path than before, I would like to think, or I would argue, that a peaceful and stable Indo-Pacific, or Asia-Pacific now again, is in US own interests. And as China's power and influence grow, the choices and actions that China will make, right, will inform the rest of the world what kind of great power it is aspiring to be. So I've argued previously and still continue to believe that the primary responsibility in maintaining the peace, security, and stability in the South China Sea is a shared one between regional countries. On top of that, we need to recognize that extra-regional stakeholders also have an interest and arguably an obligation to ensure and sustain this peace, stability, and order at sea. So a few words about ASEAN. Yesterday, we heard that all claimants have different strategy and priorities. And the situation, in my mind, is a lot more nuanced, right? And many of you who are expert watching this will know that it's not simply a comparison between the Philippines and other ASEAN claimants. In my view, claimant states has defended their interests in various ways, depending on their capacity, capability, and of course, political will. Sometimes this effort has swung so wildly, right? So wildly across the alignment spectrum, depending on the personality in power, as Manila's own Swish and Swift has shown. In my mind, this has made it difficult. This has made it difficult for ASEAN and some of the other member states to express solidarity if the goalposts kept changing. So having said that, of course, ASEAN has taken a collective position on the South China Sea dispute for the first time in a statement released at the end of 2023. I think most of you would have seen it after the Christmas and New Year break, right? That particular statement made a strong call to restore and enhance mutual trust and confidence, as well as exercise self-restraint in the conduct of activity that will complicate or escalate disputes and affect peace and stability in the South China Sea. South China Sea being mentioned the first time, right, in an ASEAN document. So in our commentary, Elena and I said that the statement alone didn't mean much, right, as there are still no very viable mechanisms to help alleviate tensions at sea. Yet it has in our mind, a significant milestone for the grouping, given the outstanding tension that we are seeing amongst claimants themselves, and also the lack of vested interest by non-claimants, right, non-ASEAN claimants. So we've already heard that Philippines as ASEAN chair this year, and Malaysia as the co-chair with China on the relationship with China, has been pushing for the negotiation of the COC. Well, as an analyst, I'm hopeful for a meaningful consensus to be achieved on the remaining vexing issues, such as the treatment of international law, the applicability of the COC, and of course the characteristic of the document itself. But there's no illusion, right? There's no illusion, however, that this will be a sure and easy reach, particularly against the wider backdrop of the contemporary realities that I mentioned on the onset. I think yesterday we have also heard that there's no illusion that even if we have a COC, it will change behavior overnight. So to conclude, I think the agenda of this particular conference already identifies some of the key themes we need to think about harder when thinking about the South China Sea. But I personally am still grappling, right, with whether the region can remain stable in spite of the South China Sea dispute, but also whether the South China Sea dispute can be kept at worst a diplomatic spat in spite of the current geopolitical condition we are experiencing. So with that, I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Chen, for your excellent, presentation, especially about the developments, in the post, awards, and including, of course, criticism against ASEAN. That will be wonderful. Yeah. Now the third speaker is Dr. Ristian. Please come to the stage.
Good morning, distinguished colleagues, guests, ladies and gentlemen. I will speak about the geopolitical importance of the 2016 Arbitral Award for Indonesia. I think much of the discussion has revolved around the legal significance, but I think yesterday we also discussed some geopolitical issues that relate to this award. So, while Indonesia is not a claimant state in the territorial disputes in the South China Sea, the legal principles at stake go to the very heart of how Indonesia defines its sovereign borders and maintain regional stability. I think one statement that merits attention is that UNCLOS is the basis for our maritime order today. Right? UNCLOS is the basis for good order at sea. Without respect to UNCLOS principles, I think there will be no good order at sea, there will be no stability. So I think that's one statement that can encapsulate Indonesia's positions on the importance of the award, because it is pursuant to UNCLOS principles. Next, please. So let me summarize 6 takeaways. Number 1, UNCLOS is the bedrock of Indonesia's maritime existence, legally recognizing our Wawasan Nusantara. Right? So Wawasan Nusantara is not just our archipelagic outlook, but it's also our maritime outlook as an archipelagic state. Secondly, the South China Sea dispute concerns the sanctity of the UNCLOS-based maritime order. In this sense, I regard the maritime order as critical to preserving stability in Southeast Asia and beyond. Thirdly, maritime delimitation works when based on UNCLOS. Fourthly, the 2016 award confirms no overlapping maritime boundaries extend from the Spratlys into Indonesian waters. So there are no so-called overlapping claims between Indonesia and the People's Republic of China. Fifth, I would like to clarify the recent November 2024 joint statement between Indonesia and China. So this joint statement is basically about business development, not shared sovereignty. The focus in resource management, right? There is no compromises on Indonesia's sovereignty as made clear by the Indonesian government. Finally, with regards to the role of non-littoral state beyond ASEAN, I think their role is very critical to help Indonesia control and exercise its maritime sovereignty. And let me specifically address the 14-nation statement issued on Sunday, 2 days ago, there is no objection from the Indonesian government with regards to that statement. Next, please. To understand why UNCLOS is existential for Indonesia, let us take a look at this 1939 map of the Dutch East Indies. Under old international law, the territorial sea was limited to 3 nautical miles around individual islands. The vast wide spaces you see between our islands, even the Java Sea, which is only like 30 minutes from here, without the traffic congestion, of course, they belong to pockets of high seas. So foreign vessels could navigate through the heart of our archipelago without Indonesia being able to regulate or control them. So Indonesia is basically geographically and geopolitically divided by the ocean. But UNCLOS changes all this, because UNCLOS is the geopolitical unifier of the Indonesian archipelago. And it plugs the gap, the vulnerability that separates all the Indonesian islands. Next. Contrast that map with this modern map representing our claims under UNCLOS. Our legal entitlements are under UNCLOS. The baseline is drawn around the outermost points of our archipelago. The dark blue represents Indonesia's archipelagic waters where it exercises full sovereignty. Beyond that, Indonesia has territorial sea, exclusive economic zone, and continental shelf stretching outwards. So this map is basically Indonesia's legal lifeline. Right? If a country ignores UNCLOS in the South China Sea, they are attacking the very legal framework that holds the Indonesian archipelago together. Next. Meanwhile, it is also important to define the South China Sea geographically, right? So when we think of the South China Sea, maybe we imagine that the South China Sea begins from the Natuna Islands, but it's actually a bit, much larger than that, right? So it encompasses waters south of the Natuna Islands. So this is based on the International Hydrographic Organization's third edition publication in 1953, and I think this is still valid. So basically, the South China Sea also serves as the bridge between Sumatra and Kalimantan. So it's a vast area, right? So it's also a critical component of Indonesian waters. Next. So, with regards to the South China Sea, Indonesia prefers to resolve maritime boundaries through UNCLOS-based bilateral negotiations. Here are 2 prime examples. On the left, our boundary agreements with Malaysia from 1969 to 1971. And on the right, our boundaries with Vietnam, including our continental shelf in 2003. During the negotiations and after the agreements of these boundaries, there were no protests at all from any third country, right? And of course, our exclusive economic zone agreement with Vietnam in 2022. However, when I asked Track 2 Chinese colleagues, what if Indonesia ratified the EEZ agreement with Vietnam? Their response is that China would object to it, right? So it's quite a contrasting experience between our continental shelf agreements with Malaysia and Vietnam before, where there was no objection. But now, if Indonesia, when Indonesia ratifies the EEZ agreement, China would object to it. So it's a very significant development, not just in legal terms, but also geopolitically, because this objection means what we discussed yesterday could be an escalation in gray zone interaction between Indonesia and China. Next. So this brings me to my crucial diplomatic point, which is Indonesia's note verbal to the United Nations on May 26, 2020. So I believe that this document is not just a legal document. It's not just a diplomatic document. It is also a legal document. In this document, Indonesia formally rejected the circular notes from the People's Republic of China. Indonesia explicitly reiterated its position that the 9-dash line or the 10-dash line might implying historical rights clearly lacks international legal basis. Next, please. So let me break down the significance of that note verbal. First, it explicitly mentioned the Arbitral Award twice, right? So it's very significant for Indonesia. Secondly, it also clarified Indonesia's status as a non-claimant state because we are not a party to the territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Thirdly, regarding maritime delimitation, Indonesia reaffirmed the award's ruling that no Spratly features are entitled to an EEZ or continental shelf. Fourth, Indonesia stated that China's claims are inconsistent with UNCLOS, and we have, quote, overlapping claims, unquote, with China. Ultimately, the 2016 award peacefully, right? So peacefully reinforces UNCLOS. So I object the statement that says that the arbitration, international arbitration, including the award, goes against the spirit of peaceful settlement of disputes. It is part and parcel of peaceful settlement of disputes. So basically, the award directly confirms and reinforces Indonesia's status as an archipelagic state because the award complies fully with UNCLOS provisions. Next. So we must also address, and let me discuss the recent China-Indonesia joint statement from November 9, 2024. So this statement sparked a number of controversies due to phrases like, quote, joint development in areas of overlapping claims, unquote, and the omission of UNCLOS. However, the immediate reactions were swift. The Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a clarifying press statement on November 11th. We saw the meeting between Indonesian President and US President Biden on November 12th, reiterating the importance, taking note of the award, and Indonesia's own foreign minister parliamentary hearing on December 2nd that basically stated that there is no change in Indonesia's position on the South China Sea. So these actions, in fact, reaffirm UNCLOS and prompted Indonesia to dismiss the 9-dash line even more often. And it prompted Indonesia also to state that the joint development is not about sovereignty, it's all about business engagement, business interaction with China. So I think this is very important for our neighbors in ASEAN to understand that what Indonesia is cooperating with China is about economics. It's not about a political agreement to divide the so-called overlapping claims between Indonesia and any country. Next, please. So, what are the ways forward based on the 2016 Arbitral Award? I think first, regarding the code of conduct, as far as Indonesia is concerned, the geographical scope must acknowledge that there are no overlapping claims with Indonesia, right? Any joint development must be framed purely around business and not sovereignty or sovereign rights, right? Of course, as the previous speaker said, the code of conduct is a consensus document. So compromises are inevitable. And I think we have seen this in several of ASEAN statements, including one statement issued during Indonesian ASEAN chairmanship in December 2023 about the importance to maintaining maritime stability in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN. In that statement, there was no reference to the award at all. Of course, it was lamentable, but that is the price of consensus, right? Not everyone in ASEAN agrees to make an explicit mention of the award. Secondly, and I think this is already discussed yesterday, we must strengthen our cooperation among maritime law enforcement agencies, and including the ASEAN Coast Guard and Maritime Law Enforcement Forum, which focuses on confidence and capacity building measures. And I heard that there will be the first ever ASEAN Coast Guard exercise this year. And also, we should establish norms and guidelines for the prevention and de-escalation of incidents at sea. And I think this is one fundamental point where, when we expect there will be more gray zone escalation. So how we can maintain maritime safety during gray zone interactions. In conclusion, the 2016 Arbitral Award is vital because it defends the UNCLOS-based order that allows Indonesia to exist as a unified, sovereign archipelagic state. Thank you for your time.
So, ladies and gentlemen, now let me invite all speakers to the stage and to have questions and answer session. So, please. China, is really the new development for ASEAN colleagues. So I think it's better to ask now later on how our ASEAN colleagues respond to the joint developments that has been issued by Indonesia and China. Well, that is actually just one of the questions that maybe will be very important to raise. So now let me invite the comment and questions from the floor on this particular issue. I think the geopolitical issue is very, very important to discuss. Anyone of you, please? Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, a lot. You, yeah, please.
Thank you. My name is Haikal from Universitas Indonesia. I want to ask two questions actually. The first is how the geostrategic concept of the first island chain intertwined with the South China Sea dispute, and also the second one is about the Indonesia-China joint statement, because Mr. Ristian previously said that it's about business development, but that is the view from Indonesia. But does China share the same view, or does the joint development could lead into like a slippery slope when it used to it used to be for a more political purpose? That will be my question.
Who did you address the question to?
The first one is a general question, but the second one is for Mr. Ristian.
Yeah. Okay. The gentleman next, please. You raise your hand, right? Yeah, please. No. This one.
Thank you very much. My name is Aryo Seno. I am from Indonesia Coast Guard. I would like to discuss to our speakers, but especially to my beloved colleague, Dr. Ristian. My question is about, in fact, we see that China have built some military base, military equipment on some islands in Spratly or Paracel. So my question is, how should we react to those military equipment built by China? Because one side we see that China claim is breaking the law. In this case, is UNCLOS, but we just allow them to build their military base or military equipment in the claimant. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak. Now let me give the opportunity to our colleagues from the Philippines. Yeah.
Good morning to our panel speakers. In yesterday's panel one, Dr. Zheng, representative of China, in his presentation mentioned that one of the reasons why China does not recognize the Arbitral Award is that the obligation for exchange views under UNCLOS Article 283 was not fulfilled or complied with. And the Philippines has always been consistent that we have complied with Article 283 through several years of direct engagement, bilateral consultations with China, which has not produced any progress, and on the other hand resulted to more negative situation on the ground. So my question to all the panel experts is, before and post Arbitral Award 2016, what do you think, how do you see the preference of ASEAN member states on bilaterally engaging with China vis-a-vis multilateral approach? What is the preference of other states on the importance of engaging on these two different platforms? Thank you.
Thank you. And anyone else? I forgot actually. Yeah. Please, the lady. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about regional order, global order, regional order. Prime Minister for Canada, Mark Carney, recently argued that middle powers must work together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, right? His Davos speech earlier this year. So in the South China Sea, we are seeing growing involvement by middle powers such as Japan, Australia, several European states, Canada included, through maritime patrols, exercises, and new security partnerships. But the question would be, at what point does this helpful balancing risk becoming counterproductive? So that's, the role of middle powers in this region. So, and the second question would be, does this evolving strategic landscape ultimately strengthen or complicate the relevance of the 2016 Arbitral Award and the prospects of a meaningful COC? So this question is for all three panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is the lady. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that panel. I thought that was quite insightful. This question is directed to all three, but particularly to Jane. Jane, I think what stood out to me was really your very brief overview of influential variables that do determine the competing paradigms of the respective Southeast Asian states. And in fact, I think what we may be leaning towards is the fact that competing paradigms do contribute to disparate foreign policy within this region. And the US and China having competing worldviews in itself would further exacerbate this disparity. So we've got these different worldviews, not just within the region, but also beyond. And so it'd be really interesting if I could pose two questions to you. The first being, it'd be great to get your thoughts on the type of spectrum that these different countries are operating, a spectrum of worldviews, and how then do their different positions along the spectrum threaten consensus? The second is the million-dollar question, right? How then do we align these paradigms, and would the solution be to resort to cooperation around low-hanging fruits? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me now start with Ristian first, because I changed the order. Okay, please, Ristian.
Yeah, thank you. I think I have three questions, right? Number one is from Haikal about the first island chain, right? So the first island chain is actually not a new concept. It's derived from the 20th century, actually, and where all the islands from Japan down south, Taiwan, Philippines, right? There are U.S. military presence there, where American military operates. So I think in Chinese military strategic thinking, the only way that China can establish control, not just Taiwan, but also its immediate near waters, East China Sea, Taiwan Strait, and South China Sea, right, is basically to dominate these areas and try to push foreign powers like America as far away from these island chains. So the South China Sea is a critical part of this strategic thinking. And this relates to the question, the second question that Aryo mentioned about militarization of Chinese occupied features over there. Let's bear in mind that China is not the only party in the South China Sea that does the reclamation and does the fortification there. But I think in Chinese military and strategic thinking, the militarization of the islands are very critical to observe and to guard against potential foreign interference by foreign powers like America. And this is important also because the South China Sea directly borders Taiwan, the Taiwan Strait. So any major escalation in the Taiwan Strait will will also spill over to the South China Sea. And this is, we are already seeing this trend recently, not just within, between, inside the Taiwan Strait, but also east of Taiwan, after Japan and the Philippines agreed to delimit maritime boundary. So again, we have a new front, so to speak, right? So you have the East China Sea, Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and now the Philippine Sea, which is east of Taiwan. Again, this is a way of China of pushing the first island chain, the limit of the first island chain further east. With regards to the militarization of the features, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the southernmost feature of the southernmost Chinese occupied feature is the Quarteron Reef, right? So, and China claims EEZ and continental shelf around the Quarteron Reef. So, as far as Indonesia is concerned, right, because China says that there are overlapping claims between Indonesia and China, so these facilities can become a replenishment hubs for Chinese assets to exercise gray zone warfare within Indonesian EEZ or continental shelf boundary in the north of the Natuna Islands. And again, the implication will be serious because you're from the Coast Guard, so the Coast Guard, you need to guard this area as well. So there will be there could be escalation which can lead to incident. So the question then is, what can we do to prevent incidents at sea? So I think this is why mechanisms such as the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum will be really critical. At least, if there is gray zone activities going on, such activities should not lead to kinetic interactions, right? And I think we are already seeing examples, for instance, between the China and Japan, right, in the management of the East China Sea disputes, where there are no confrontations, no ramming. So I think this is the kind of, I wouldn't say compromises, but I think this is the kind of interaction that are preferable for the time being, right? Do I have the third question? Sorry.
About the involvement of the middle power.
Oh yeah, the middle power. I think they are very important for Indonesia because, as I said, Indonesia still lacks resources to control and regulate our maritime borders. And I think with the involvement of non-littoral middle powers, Australia, Japan, European Union, and even India, the Prime Minister Modi just visited Indonesia. It was a successful visit. So we will require a lot of resources, technology especially, to monitor our maritime domain. And again, for instance, with Japan is building a large cutter for the Indonesian Coast Guard. So we will use, Indonesia will likely use that cutter to patrol our borders, including in the EEZ, in the Natuna Islands. So cooperation with middle powers who agree, with the importance of UNCLOS is critical, because again, Indonesia doesn't have everything it needs to manage its maritime domain effectively without cooperation with other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ristian. Ristian? Yeah.
Yep. I'll quickly address, the Secretary's question about China and how Southeast Asian states are looking at engaging with China, and whether that modus operandi has changed since the award. In my mind, I don't think it has changed significantly. Why? Is because we all know that state always prioritize bilateral relationship, not just with China, but any other countries where it's on issue of core national interest, right? It is only when there is common interest among the ASEAN member states where ASEAN will be the choice mechanism. So multilateral, platforms and mechanism is the option when, the parties all agree that this is a common interest to proceed with. But when it comes to advancing individual national interests, then, the preferred platform has always been, and I don't think it has changed, to use bilateral, means. So in that sense, to Irene's question about middle powers, Sarah and I put up a commentary as well, again, probably only Sarah and I and the editor read, about middle powers and how middle powers cooperation have changed with the region have changed. In my mind, I agree with Andy in terms of, the recognition that everybody has an interest in terms of peace, stability, and finding common ways to achieve that. But in my mind, there is always going to be a limitation, right? A limitation in terms of what is achievable with some of the increasingly what we call minilateral mechanisms. And again, in my mind, these mechanisms are useful for a specific purpose. And I don't think we should try to, add on, additional value or expect additional value out of some of these mechanisms put in place in time of a particular need. To me, in fact, the format of that cooperation or the mechanism is more important than, the parties that are going to be involved. Why? Is because, in my mind, given, how quickly things are changing and developing, these days, I think we need to have a very strong sense that we need to be flexible, right? While we need to be inclusive, we also need to be flexible and not to be too hung up about, a particular mechanism or institutions that we put out there, especially the new ones, that, when it's no longer fit for purpose, there is a possibility that, we will abandon it and rethink new mechanisms and bringing in new partners. That to me is one way to be more less reactive, but to be able to react better to the evolving or how quickly the issues are evolving these days. The other question that I often ask when talking about middle power, not just about middle power engagement with this part of the world, but even the great powers, is that how they view Southeast Asia. Do they view Southeast Asia through the lens of China, right? In that sense, I find that is extremely unhelpful, because, if one day these middle power no longer have a problem with China, will ASEAN and Southeast Asia still matter? I think that is a question that, I'll often ask when there are new initiatives or new partners coming into the region seeking that partnership. I think that question has to be answered. Ashura, my favorite question. Really, because a few years back, those of you who would have heard me in regional conference, I've been arguing about this diverging view about regional and international order. And at that time, I often argued that the two extreme spectrum has been the zero-sum game and that of a cooperative nature, and of course everything in between. So in my mind, the zero-sum game vision, the realist vision, is that power matters, right? So it means that small states like some of us in Southeast Asia will inevitably suffer because the vulnerabilities, right, of small states have not changed, right? Despite even during time of peace. So now during times of turmoil, in my mind, the zero-sum game approach where power matters, where only those that matters to you are worthy to be your partner, I think is going to be highly challenging, right? For some of us small middle powers in this part of the world to be able to find space and agency. So for those with the cooperative vision, which is in my mind, most of Southeast Asian countries have that point of view in terms of the order that we hope to have, where we try to recognize, or we recognize that we have to cooperate to ensure and sustain the continued development and or economic prosperity that we have, and that we have to come together to address all the threats and challenges that we spoke about yesterday. Right, there was a long list of avenues for cooperation, and I continue to argue that these areas for cooperation are there, despite the South China Sea territorial and maritime disputes. Right, even if we carve that aside, we have a lot of issues that we need to collaborate collectively. But the problem, as Ashura highlighted, is that increasingly it's difficult to bridge. Why? Is because as we get so distracted in trying to manage and respond to geopolitical and some of the conflicts around us, that we kind of drop the ball in terms of what is going to be important for us to sustain that continued growth that we still have. Again, I argue that the space is probably going to be shrinking quite quickly. I don't have a good answer in terms of low-hanging fruits, because 20 plus years that I've been working on this, we have been talking about low-hanging fruit in ASEAN. What kind of tree can continue to bear low-hanging fruits? And that tree will require all of ASEAN to collectively, nurture. If we don't come together to collectively nurture that tree, there's no more low-hanging fruits for us to reap. So, again, do we, and that is, where my conclusion was meant to highlight, is that I'm kind of stuck, right? Do we try to solve a regional problem first, or do we try to help everyone manage, the broader geopolitical turmoil that we are facing? Thank you.
Thank you. And now, please, Dr. Willoughby.
The first island chain is a Cold War creation reflecting America's strategy and view of the world. At the same time, the San Francisco system, the hub and spokes model, embedded or integrated many of us in Southeast Asia within this vision. The Philippines is one of the longtime allies of the United States, and as such, this is also where I now move to Irene's question on whether or not having external powers is helpful or unhelpful in this regard. For many in Southeast Asia, having external powers can be a good thing, considering the limitations on our capabilities. But there's also such a thing as having too many chefs in the kitchen. And right now, this seems to be where we're at. This is where the party is at, but having way too many actors in the region can also be detrimental for achieving the kinds of objectives and goals that we have set for ourselves. So Irene, sorry, there is no clear-cut answer to this. On one hand, it can be helpful because for small and medium powers, this is a way to internationalize issues, to bring the issues to the agendas of other more powerful countries, but at the same time, it can also be detrimental. So in that sense, it will be up to us really to push back and establish limits on where and when external powers can be helpful or not. Asura's question is also very, very good regarding competing paradigms and low-hanging fruits. I agree with Jane. What kind of tree are we talking about here? And the only thing that I can think of, okay, I cannot identify the tree, but a way to align some of our competing narratives, paradigms, objectives, whatever, maybe to calibrate how we see multilateral engagements. Somewhere between bilateral and multilateral would be mini-lateral. There are, of course, some limitations still to mini-lateral arrangements, but these are functional cooperative arrangements based on different issues that we can further explore. So I think those are my thoughts, at least for the first round.
Yeah, thank you very much, for the response. I give to the floor. Let me use my privilege to ask the question, and I think that's related to the issue that raised by our colleagues, from the Philippines. In what way, in the case of the South China Sea, ASEAN will be able to come up with a kind of the so-called solidarity of ASEAN and unity of ASEAN? Any response? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I remember, as I mentioned, the 2023 statement issued during Indonesian chairmanship, right? If it's solidarity about maintaining maritime stability, about preserving peace, about the importance of UNCLOS, I think there is no dispute. There is no disagreement among ASEAN. And so this is the lowest common denominator, I think. But again, in 2023 statement also reveals the lack of consensus in ASEAN about endorsing the 2016 award explicitly. And I think this is the challenge in ASEAN, although there is no explicit objection to the Arbitral Award. There is also no positive statement to say that this award must be enforced. I haven't seen, other than the Philippines, I haven't seen any other ASEAN countries have strongly advocated for the enforcement of the award. And I don't think, anytime soon that we will see the award explicitly mentioned in ASEAN consensus documents, not least the Code of Conduct, unfortunately. Although some principles that are discussed in the award may become the basis for COC negotiations from the ASEAN team. I don't think the award will be mentioned in the Code of Conduct drafts. Yeah, that's my view.
Ristian?
In my mind, it's the ability to drive a common agenda, i.e., the end game. To be able to see what is the end game rather than talking about should we be supportive of just the award, should we be supportive of individual claimant states, current policy, which may change, which makes it difficult for the others to support or show solidarity, especially for countries who often have a very principled approach, like Singapore, like Vietnam.
Sorry about that.
So what do I mean by driving a common agenda? I think some of you would have heard me many times talking about how I view the South China Sea issue, and I see it in 3 dimensions, right? So the first dimension is about the territorial maritime dispute where only the claimant countries are the ones that need to negotiate, right? That needs to be in the room to negotiate with the claimants themselves. in that sense, we can show support for that process, right? And to a large extent, individual member states can be driving that as well, to showcase that, this is where ASEAN stands in dealing with territorial and maritime disputes. So that's the dispute level. The second level to me is the ASEAN-China level. What I mean is, in terms of thinking about good order in the South China Sea, which is beyond just the territorial dispute, which in my mind is what the COC is trying to drive at as well. It doesn't only address the territorial and maritime disputes, it addresses, we hope that it will, lay out a framework for behavior, right? And that is where, I sincerely hope that, all ASEAN countries can come together to show a agency in driving that agenda, right? And likewise, in the third tier, where we talk about safety, security, environment, everything, and I think we all agree yesterday that, extra-regional stakeholder has an interest in this, and that, when we bring together all these extra-regional stakeholders, I do hope that ASEAN can also be in the, I don't like to use the word driver's seat, but, to show agency, the ability for us to set the agenda in terms of, how, in terms of the mechanisms, in terms of the issues to be raised, right? So in that sense, if there can be an alignment, I know it's a big ask, but that alignment, to me, is of higher value than, individual countries supporting, another member state on a particular issue at any point of time.
I'd like to take issue with one of the cornerstone norms of ASEAN, which is non-interference. This has been, enshrined in our documents. It emphasizes sovereignty, but the norm has also been very, very heavily criticized because the policy has precluded ASEAN from taking timely and enforceable action to address humanitarian crisis, democratic regression, etc. I mean, right now, the norm has actually become a little bit just for the sake of performance. We do it because it's expected of us. So it's very, very performative, but it goes to show that this norm has really failed to diffuse because it's not been internalized by member states. I'd go ahead and argue that actually parallel to this norm, there is another that seems to be internalized and embedded in our psyche, that it's blended in the background. And in Filipino, we call this bayanihan, collective action. There are also similar conceptions about this in different Southeast Asian states. While we pay lip service to non-interference, it is actually very, very problematic. So I think we should calibrate and think of parallel norms. In practice, actually, we are more heavily involved with each other than we would like to admit. It's not that we are interfering tremendously in others' domestic affairs, but we also don't want to be just totally not interfere, and find the balance between non-interference and not being completely, indifferent.
Yeah, let me put it bluntly. Do you think that, from the Filipino perspective, do you think that ASEAN play a little role in the South China Sea conflict?
I'm going to get into trouble answering this question. When the 2012 Scarborough incident happened, the Philippines obviously had to seek help from neighbors and then from our ally. And unfortunately, those calls for help were not forthcoming. Which is precisely the reason why the Philippines has decided to file an arbitration case against China. To be fair, though, we did ask help from ASEAN, but ASEAN was severely limited in terms of how it would reach out a helping hand to us. So, to answer your question on whether ASEAN was effective in helping the Philippines, it was effective to the best of its ability. But we could not expect ASEAN to help solve the region's problems if it's not in its DNA to actually do a lot of these things. So it did its best to the best of its abilities under the circumstances. Was that diplomatic enough?
That is a wonderful, actually, reply or response. Well, I think the most important thing that we need to think is how do we project, the issue. I mean, the projections, one of the fundamental question is, whether in the future, in the next 10 or 15 years, to come, there will be increasing, tensions or militarizations, because we are talking the issue, about the issue, from the geopolitical perspectives, whether there will be a kind of more tensions, militarizations of the conflicts, where, as we have seen now, there have been a lot of realignments, among the actors. I think the Philippines has been very active in developing the defense cooperation with Japan, with Australia, and so on and so forth. So I think from the analytical point of view, how is the future of the conflict? Can we prevent it from, open war, from, happening? That is actually the fundamental question. And I think it is a very strategic one. Because we cannot take for granted the situation, the peaceful situation now, because sometimes, war or open conflict can happen anytime. We do not know, So I think the issue is miscalculation, because all actors, I believe, are rational, but at some time the situation, can cause, the so-called irrationality, because of the miscalculation that could happen anytime. So with that, I would like to open the floor for the next question and answer session. Yes, my colleagues and also the three gentlemen at the back. So I hope that we still have time, to be honest. Please.
I address this to all the panelists. The history of ASEAN, right? We didn't want a security community because that would be too much back then. So we opted for a political security, which is basically an Indonesian idea about a political security community. Now we're seeing the limits of what we can do as a political security community, but at the same time, the conditions seem to be unripe even more for a security community, given how what you explained earlier, Jane, Charmaine, and Ristian, about how divided the region is, not only on South China Sea, but also many other political and diplomatic problems that we have. But given that it's also, I think there's time to review the ASEAN Charter and moving forward. What do you think is the path moving forward? Because there seems to be a risk of us in ASEAN getting to be more fragmented than ever. Thank you.
Yes, gentleman at the back, on my right.
Thank you, Mas Edi. Wafa Karisma from CSIS. Got two questions and one comment. For Charmaine, my question is, how would you describe the risk for a bad code of conduct? A bad code of conduct. How would that look like? For Jane, I think it's along the line of the question so far in terms of projecting to the future. But I would like to put you on a scenario. This is a scenario where code of conduct is already completed, right? And China actively block what ASEAN has to say about South China Sea because they will say that code of conduct is already completed, right? And then, of course, journalists will knock on RSIS door and comes to you and ask from South China Sea Morning Post, from Straits Times, from Nikkei, what is ASEAN's role in this case? And how would you specifically answer this question, and what mechanics would you point them to? Because a lot of the officials will usually say at this moment in time, yeah, code of conduct is still happening, but what about when code of conduct is actually completed? And one comment to Ristian, my friend. I still don't think, Ristian, you can save the part on overlapping claims on joint development. Because they haven't clarified where these claims are geographically located. And don't we have to say really sharply that by national law, by Indonesian law, that the very sentence is illegal? Because we don't recognize their claim, their historical claim. Just that part, because the other part, the joint development part, you've already answered. Thank you.
Yes, sir, please.
Hello, I have two questions. First is the larger one. Well, as you know, basically the situation of Southeast Asia is rather similar to the situation of Eastern Europe surrounded by the great powers. And historically, China has been, whenever China is under threat from the north, the Southeast Asian states like Angkor, like Srivijaya are able to prosper independent. But when China is able to assert power to the south, then the Southeast Asian countries are brought back to the Tianxia. The question is, given the fact that China is rising and the other hegemonic powers are sort of diminishing, is there any impetus towards stronger unification within ASEAN? In the same way, for example, that the Soviet threat, for example, generated an impetus for institutionalization and unification in Europe? That's the first question. The second question is, as we know, China started including South China Sea as a core interest sometime in the 2000s. And we don't know the exact bureaucratic reasons why that happened. Is there even a remote possibility that due to elite realignment, that decision could be reversed? So that they would go back to having 4 core interests instead of 5? Because again, we don't know the dynamics that went into that, but is there any remote possibility that it could be reversed? And is there any way that ASEAN socialization, like the COC, could bring that about? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. I think our Chinese colleagues, I think we give opportunity. Yeah, to
Thanks, Chair. Because there are so many topics about China, so I want to have a comment. This panel focuses on geopolitical consideration and regional stability. As we all know, the core of the South China Sea issue lies in disputes over sovereignty over certain islands and reefs, as well as conflicts concerning maritime domination. I believe none of the parties directly concerned will readily relinquish their claims. This means the issue cannot be resolved anytime soon and will remain a long-standing challenge. Nevertheless, China and the Asia member states are inseparable neighbors, sharing contiguous and coastlines. Our coexistence will span hundreds, even thousands of years, perhaps until the end of the planet. Therefore, we bear an obligation to prevent disagreements that cannot be settled in the short time from escalating into larger conflicts. We must put an end to fertile rhetorical and public opinion battles on unilateral provocation and groundless accusations. We have to face an undeniable reality. Even after provoking each other, both sides will still need to figure out how to coexist. We should not divert by natural energy to such counterproductive fiction. China and Asia countries face far more urgent agendas calling for joint cooperation. Weather patterns along the Western Pacific Rim will will experience an abnormal shift this year, with the El Nino phenomenon set to intensify markedly. Both China and the Asian nations will bear the brunt of extreme weather. Typhoon, floods, and heat waves are projected to severely disrupt people's lives and livelihoods this year and next. We also confront a host of emerging challenges across marine sectors, difficulties that cannot be addressed by any single country acting solely within its own sovereign or maritime justification works. We must stand side by side to tackle this shared challenge together. So I have the comment to or us to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the gentleman next to our Chinese colleagues, you raise your hand, right? No, okay, sorry. But yeah, Pak Krishna, please.
Terima kasih Mas Edi. Thank you very much. Krishna Budoro from Jalasena Maritime Studies, a new maritime study centers. I just wondering, do we take a wrong way, having considered that it seemed that we just focus on COC and then the formal way. I just wondering, do we have to look into the Eastern way, having considered, for example, how to solve the issues or dispute settlement in Eastern way? And then because COC is already more than 10 years, and then it seems when I'm still lieutenant until I'm retired, and then the issue is still there. And then I just want to ask you all, the panelists, thank you then.
Thank you, Pak Krishna. Pak Krishna is my colleague, retired Navy. Yeah, so thank you again. So would you like to respond? Yeah, please, start from you. Okay.
Thank you very much for this round of questions and comments. Let me begin by addressing Neil's question about the impetus for a stronger ASEAN, comparing it with circumstances in Europe in the Second World War. The impetus back then in that part of the world was really a lot, not to mention the fact that it was the first time ever that nuclear weapons have been introduced as a strategic weapon. So far, we don't have a similar type in this part of the world. So until we have it, hopefully we never do, something as destructive as that, but until we have something quite similar, we might still grapple with, pulling together and making ASEAN much stronger and more unified. A bad COC will be the COC as it currently stands, without any clarity on geographic scope, without clarity on its legal standing, etc. And to conclude it as is would be very, very bad and detrimental, not just for the Philippines, not just for the region, but also in terms of its status vis-a-vis other bodies of international law. July, in the recent Asia-Pacific Roundtable in Kuala Lumpur, there has been a lot of discussion really on revising the ASEAN Charter. In that sense, that might be a way to change the genetic code of the regional organization and to help bring this organization circa 2026 rather than 1967. I also agree with the idea that we have been very much focused, obsessed even, with the formal mechanisms of the code of conduct to the detriment of other types of informal mechanisms or arrangements to deal with and handle other issues out there. So I think that's a reminder for all of us that while the COC is important, probably not on the way that it is currently it's currently envisioned. While it is important, there are also other types of arrangements out there to help us address other issues.
Yeah, please.
Well, since you ended with the charter question, I'll address July's question about that as well. 2 points to be made here. Number one, I recall during Indonesian chairmanship there was an effort to try to revise the ASEAN Charter. At that time, I was asking a senior Indonesian colleague because one of the element that was up for discussion was removal of consensus. Right? Then my question to that Bapak was, Bapak, we do need to have consensus to be able to get rid of consensus, right? You think we can get that consensus to get rid of consensus? I mean, that was, joke aside. When it comes to, rather than just the charter, thinking about the DNA of ASEAN itself, when I say this, I think my current boss, who was formerly ASEAN SecGen, is probably going to be very disappointed with me. Because I think increasingly it's difficult for our seniors to make a case that, don't think about what ASEAN has not done. Think about what ASEAN has done and what we do not see, which, as Charmaine highlighted, we do not see major conflict in Southeast Asia, right? So, when we do the scorecard eventually, that is important. But I think increasingly, being able to show something tangible is going to be very important to persuade even those within ASEAN in terms of the value of an institution whose, I wouldn't say that it's whose time has come, but will need some restructuring, right? So just by saying that, because we have no major conflict, etc., that shows the value of ASEAN increasingly is a very strenuous argument, right? Question from Wafa. Let's do a joint project, CSIS, RSIS, on what kind of mechanism should come after or post COC. The reason for that is because I think some of you would have heard me argue this as well, is that there really needs to be a dispute settlement mechanism clause in the COC. And I'm not talking about a mechanism to resolve the territorial and maritime disputes. I'm talking about after we have a COC, and if parties to it do not abide by it, we have a dispute in terms of interpretation and implementation of the COC, do we have a mechanism? And I think that mechanism will be important, right? Whether is it inscribed in the COC or can we, between ASEAN and China, come up with it separately, I think regardless will be very important for us to showcase the value of an effort for more than 2 decades, right? Neil's question. In my mind, Neil, up to today, maybe only half of Southeast Asian countries are enamored with the West. Conversely, about half of these countries are never enamored with the West anyway, and therefore a rising China will be very appealing. Right? So to me, it has further fragmented ASEAN rather than, created the impetus for a more consolidated ASEAN in that sense. But your last problem is one that is beyond my competency. I've always said that I don't understand China enough to be able to answer that question, knowledgeably, whether, China is moving one way or the other. Sorry about that, Neil.
Ristian, please, on the issue of the overlapping claim between Indonesia and China.
Yeah, I think number one, I think that has been made clear by the Indonesian Foreign Minister in Parliament that there have been no discussion on where the overlapping claims are, right? And even the English text of the joint statement didn't mention the overlapping claims are between Indonesia and China explicitly, although people may infer that the overlapping claims concern the two countries. So that's number one. Number two, there is also a joint committee to discuss potential maritime cooperation based on that joint statement. And that whatever the results, whatever the agreement is in that committee must abide by the respective laws of the two countries. So from this committee, I think Indonesia is trying to steer the discussion towards joint business development. So the focus is on economic, but it's not going to be a joint development area, right? So this is not going to be a rehash of Indonesia, Australia, GDA in the past, as was screened yesterday. So I think the rules and regulations that apply within Indonesian territorial waters will apply Indonesian laws. And of course, there will be potential objection from China in the committee discussions. But again, if China disagrees, then Indonesia, the project cannot move forward, and so it will be stalled. And I think stall is the state that we are currently in, because I believe China will insist on applying its own laws on the purported overlapping area, and Indonesia objects to that still consistently. So I hope that the overlapping claim is already dead in the water, right? So there is no more overlapping claim. There is just joint business development with under Indonesian laws and regulations that apply within Indonesian territorial waters. Thank you.
Well, we still have 10 minutes of time, so I would like to open just one more question. Please be quick. Anyone? No more question? Yeah. Please, or comment maybe. Yeah, our Filipino colleagues here.
I couldn't let the speakers get away that easily. Anyway, Dr. Eddie mentioned about the dangers of miscalculation on the ground, which can tremendously escalate the situation. Anytime it can happen. And noting the history of and the lessons of the SEATO, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization in the 1980s, and also noting the current efforts to revise, to update the ASEAN Charter, which could also take some time because you need the consensus to remove the consensus. What are the prospects of an ASEAN-NATO or a closer regional defense coordination mechanism within the ADMM platform itself or through other mechanisms, discussions within the ASEAN? Your thoughts, please. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Like Das Bong, no? I paid too much for this conference to let all of you go easily. just a question. I'm going to do the reverse. Yeah, Bong was looking at the more international. I'd like to ask the panel to take a crack at this question. Isn't ASEAN now becoming a victim of the domestic politics of a lot of the countries involved? Which by that I mean we have political leaders who may or may not have a grasp of foreign policy and the regional environment, and maybe not because of their own fault, but because the domestic aspects are taking a toll on the way that national security decisions are being made. Just looking at the cases of Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and so on, that there are so many domestic pressures, and that some of our leaders are making domestic-based considerations for the foreign policies of their countries. Thank you.
Would you like to take up this?
Sir, I need to do a literature review on collective security arrangements. But what I remember from my days in school is that collective security arrangements like NATO were very much significant and effective in the context of the Cold War, where there were only a couple of great powers that can command the kind of presence that the United States and the Soviet Union did during that time. This time around, we have a plethora of these powers, great, middle, or otherwise so, that would make an Asian NATO rather challenging. I mean, NATO itself is also facing huge amounts of challenges, not least because of American Trump's presence in driving NATO. So I think given that there are a lot of domestic considerations and many of our leaders are making decisions based on what is happening in their domestic constituencies, it may make an Asian NATO even more difficult to achieve.
I agree with Charmaine. Is that enough for you, Julio? In my mind, I've always struggled with the point about how do we persuade some of our ASEAN neighbors that sometimes it's in your national interest, right? Long-term interest. It's in your national long-term interest to support the regional agenda in the short term. Right, so absolutely agree with you in terms of how you assess the problem that we have today. Is to me, most of our countries are struggling to simply react and respond, to think about longer term priorities or longer term agenda that could help in the long run. I mean, let's acknowledge also the fact that a lot of our administrations are short-term, right? So they will have to achieve certain KPI within, while they are in power. So that has always, to me, that is a perennial problem anyway. It has not changed, since the dynamic. It just got sharper, right? It has perpetuated itself more. To a large extent, we also understand, the weakness of the institution, and in my mind, it was by design. It was designed in the first place to be that, so that it will not expand to, what we are debating today, whether it can be a ASEAN NATO and et cetera, right? So if that limitation is inherent, why are we expecting now for it to perform, right? I think, everybody usually like to quote Bilahari in terms of, why do you expect a cow to perform like a horse and stuff like that, right? So that, to me, is one key point. Earlier on, there was a question about ASEAN way, or Asian way that, I think we skipped, right? What is the Asian way, anyway? Right? Because, we talk about the ASEAN way of managing disputes, but Kresno, the Asian way, very often we hear this being invoked by China, right? That, the Asian way is that it's done via negotiation behind closed door, et cetera. To me, when it comes to territorial and maritime disputes, when you're negotiating boundary, for example, behind closed door, I always thought that, you can throw international law out of the window. Why? Because when it comes to negotiating a boundary, I can give everything to my neighbor if I want to, and there's no law to preclude me from doing that. The law is there when both sides cannot agree on how do we achieve something, then the law is there to, to prescribe equidistance and stuff like that as a guiding principle, but it has never been, prescriptive in terms of this is how you negotiate, and that it doesn't stop you from giving away everything if you want to. So that, in a sense, to me, the so-called Asian way of negotiating, needs to be explored a little bit more, and we don't simply say that because we are Asian, we will go with the Asian way. I think we want to avoid that. Thank you.
Yeah, 3 points. Number one, on ASEAN NATO, I think we tried that. It's called the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, right? In which Philippines and Thailand were member states from Southeast Asia. And I think Seattle was a clear example. Military alliances didn't work in this region. And I think ASEAN was formed precisely to circumvent such military alliances. However, having said that, I think military cooperation among ASEAN member states has gone a long way. And, and buttressed by the efforts like the ADMM Plus, I think there are a lot of ASEAN and sub-ASEAN measures. For instance, there have been proliferation of coordinated patrols among ASEAN littoral states, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. And starting in 2016, 2017, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, right? So I think, within this ambit, I think there is a potential for greater collaboration among ASEAN. What is remains voting is in the South China Sea, we have yet to have maritime coordinated patrols, right? So I think Vietnam has suggested this idea to Indonesia, and hopefully after Indonesia ratifies the EEZ agreement, there is some practical steps being made to realize the maritime coordinated patrols between Indonesia and Vietnam, and I think that will be good, right? Because we enforce the UNCLOS based maritime order in Southeast Asia. Number two. To Julio, domestic politics does matter, but I think structural pressures also matter. And sometimes domestic politics are quite oblivious to structural pressures until such pressures arise. Right? One example is the one that I just mentioned about the Malacca Strait coordinated patrols. There was no demand from Indonesia to have that coordinated patrols with Singapore and Malaysia, but because it was the pressure from external powers, there is a concern about Indonesian concern about sovereignty, about external powers trying to escort ships through Malacca Straits, that Indonesia, made the effort with along with Indonesia, with Malaysia and Singapore to establish that patrols. But again, domestic politics does matter to find political legitimacy to conduct these patrols. And 2016, 2017, it was driven by domestic politics because Indonesian sailors were kidnapped and ransomed in the Sulawesi Sea. So that also made trigger a push from the Indonesian domestic political audience for Indonesia to cooperate with Malaysia and the Philippines. Finally, about ASEAN way, so I agree with Jane. I don't want to get dragged into this ASEAN, non-ASEAN stereotypes, but just one example, from Indonesian involvement in UNCLOS negotiations, right? So Indonesia wanted to become recognized as an archipelagic state, with entitlement, maritime entitlement to archipelagic waters. Was that an ASEAN way or not? I don't know, but certainly Indonesia played a role in norm setting and established a new legal foundation for not just for Indonesia, but for all other countries, including the Philippines. That now you have archipelagic waters as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ristian. With that, I would like to actually to conclude, this session, by raising 4 points. It's not really conclusion, actually. I just rather raise the issues or questions. The first one is the challenges are there. It's becoming much more complex, ranging from the military, to the economy, environment, extreme weather, and so on and so forth. Number two is the issue of the choice of approaches. Whether we are going to go for bilaterals or multilateral, or I think it needs to strengthen, the ASEAN mechanism. And number three is the issue or the question of the involvement of the middle power. What kind of mechanism, what role, that we expect them to play. And number four, which is very important ones, and I think a lot of time that we already dedicated so far is discussion on number four. The ASEAN solidarity, unity, consensus, whether or not we need to revise the so-called ASEAN Charter. And actually, from the academic point of view, there has been a lot of discussions on whether or not we need to revise, because even within ASEAN itself, within the so-called the charter, there is a provision that the charter can be reviewed in 5 years. So I think that is our task now, to look at again, all of those, our obligation. So again, thank you very much for Dr. Willoughby, Chan, and also Dr. Ristian Supriyanto, and also thanks very much for your comment and questions. So now I give it back to the MC. Yeah, please.